Hello and welcome back. As you can see, we've got a different background, trying some new stuff. Anyway, so far we've covered 3 countries with a wide array of facts. Because of this, for the 4th video, I'd like to tackle a different type of video, one that focuses specifically on a subject. I'd love to tackle some specific themes within one country to get a better look at that thing within that country. We're going to kick this off with Burkina Faso, a landlocked West African country that has a very complex history and a diverse culture. The theme for today's videos will be cities. We'll be taking a look at 7 of them, with the aim at covering as much as we can within this nation, giving a look into the bigger, the smaller, and all the areas that cover the urban life. So without further ado, let's get at it. Let us start with Bobo-Dioulasso, the 2nd largest city in the country. Situated in the southwestern Houet province, there's a population of about 1.1 million people. This city is known as Sia to the locals, and it actually originally started out as 2 smaller villages that would merge together right around French occupation in 1897. This would gain more significance in 1915 when an anti-colonial uprising from the locals caused the need for a military base. The city now works as an industrial trade center of the nation, and it does a lot with food processing and cigarettes, specifically because of all the agricultural land that surrounds it. The country's very first shopping center style market opened in this city in 1952, which would play a big role in the city's economy. It's very much known for its fabrics. Similarly, there's also the Artisans Corner, which focuses a little more on forging and carving and other types of manufacturing. Much of that sector is actually passed down from family tradition, and the end result is usually a whole bunch of neat souvenirs reflecting the cultural character. In Bobo-Dioulasso, you can find a lot of major roads, as well as a railroad stop between Burkina Faso's capital, Ouagadougou, and Côte d'Ivoire's capital, Abidjan. So, a lot of Bobo-Dioullasso's culture revolves around the Islamic faith. The biggest thing that it's known for is probably the Grand Mosque of Bobo-Dioulasso. Its wooden pikes sticking out from mud brick walls and a foundation with 2 minaret towers give it a very distinct look. The architectural style is known as Sudan Sahelian, named after the region of West Africa that this indigenous style is common in. As a matter of fact, Bobo is actually a language that was commonly spoken by farmers of this region. Tradesmen spoke the language as well, but they identified as the Zara people group. These days, Jula is widely spoken as a second language behind French from the colonial days. Music is extremely important to the Burkinabe people, and Bobo-Dioulasso actually has an entire museum around that. In 2002, the Museum of Yesterday and Today, and no, I'm not talking about the band, was opened by the ASPCA with the intent to collect, preserve, and embrace the musical angle of Burkinabe culture. You can also visit the mausoleum of Princess Guimbi Ouattara, who was born in the royal family in 1836. When she died in 1919, the French would erect this mausoleum in honor of her for her facilitation of them as explorers, although it should be known that this was done for personal profit, and she did own a handful of slaves. Speaking of the French, here you can also find the Notre Dame des Lourdes Cathedral, opened in 1961. Kind of like that it's shaped like the Krusty Krab. Before we move on, we should also check a few things that surround the city. The village of Koro can be found on a rocky hill roughly 10 kilometers outside the city. Much of the village is made out of large granite blocks, and the inhabitants focus heavily on the same industries around foraging and agriculture. The Guinguette is a natural lake that formed along the Kwa River, acting as a good swimming hole roughly 20 kilometers outside of Bobo-Dioulasso. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at a far smaller one. Dori is located in the Sino province up in the northeastern desert region of Burkina Faso near the border of Niger, and it has a population of only 46,000. Unlike Bobo-Dioulasso, it does not follow the European grid-like style of city construction, but is rather spread out and more cluster-like. The main ethnic group here is known as Fula, or the Fulani people. Because of its more rural situation, much of the life here revolves around livestock. Many of the occupants are herders. Compared to some of the other cities, there's really not a whole lot to see here. However, you might stumble upon the Dori Mosque or the Grand Mosque of Dori. Swinging back to one that's a little larger, we're going to look at Koudougou. This one is located in the Boulkinde province, situated roughly 75 kilometers from the capital with a population of around 160,000. It's also connected via the same rail line mentioned in Bobo-Dioulasso. The Goronzi and the Mossi people groups make up much of the city's population. There are also a lot of surrounding smaller areas made up of these people groups as well. In fact, there are so many rural communes that you could probably break it down to about 550 villages. One of them holds the Yaniri of Kokologo, Bobo. This is basically a palace that was built in 1942, and it kind of reflects the look of the Mossi people's architecture as well as the colonizers. Moreover, it gives a neat look into the evolution of the Mossi people through the 20th century and plays a central role in the participation of the population through the Naba's mediation. Naba is basically the equivalent of a king. Similarly, looking within Koudougou's limits, there's the Iswaka Museum, which shows an even deeper look into the colonial period and was established by the Naba of Yasuka. As the third largest city, Koudougou is seeing a pretty high population growth rate. Much of this is probably due to the push for education. The Burkina Institute of Technology opened a few years ago and is now famous for its central IT tower. Alright, let's swing back into another small one. Nouna is located in the Kasi province and also serves as the capital of this province, holding about 32,000 people. Being one of the more developed small towns, you won't be hard-pressed to find cell phones, electrification, and plenty of running water. Funny enough, both ends of the main street that run east to west will eventually find themselves running into Bobo-Dioulasso. Savanna vegetation, much like a lot of this region, is a large characteristic as well as the mud architecture all working with the climate. The Nazinga Game Ranch is home to elephants, antelopes, hippos, and buffalo, and you can catch safari tours to see these in their natural habitats. About 10 miles outside of the city, there's the Tambarga Waterfalls, a solid spot for hiking and picnicking around the cliffs and the vegetation. I guess the short version is, if you're a nature person, this might be the Burkina Faso city for you. Let's move into a mid-sized city that also acts as a capital of its province called Ouahigouya. This one acts as the capital of the Yatenga province with a population of about 124,000. Situated in the northern region, this one dates back to 1757, being one of the several Mossi kingdoms. This region was actually fought for between Burkina Faso and neighboring Mali in 1985. That included this city, and the war is known as the Christmas War. Though its marketplace was bombed back then, it thrives these days with a heavy emphasis on small crafts around leather and tanneries. The city is also where you can see the Naba Congo's tomb, who was seen as the greatest ruler of the Yatenga kingdom. He died in 1787, but he was able to strengthen the central authority with the use of his soldiers, and they were aided by the flintlocks, which was the first firearm ever recorded in this region. For those into archaeology, there is a research center here focusing on that, and it's called the Center of Soum Archaeological Research. There's also the beautiful Maison de la Culture, a vibrant building that's rather self-explanatory, and Cine Gwimbi, which is one of the oldest cinemas in Burkina Faso. It played a very huge cultural role in the independence movement. Moving on to number 6, we have Gaoua, yet another capital of a province. This province is known as Poni, and the population of the city is about 45,000. Located in the greener southwest region, this place has some significance in terms of sacred history. The Lobi people group occupy a lot of this city, and nearby you can find what is known as the Sacred Grove of Trees. What this basically means is that the woodsy areas around the city have a lot of culturally and religious importance to the population. Speaking of which, this city and the region around it is one of the wettest of Burkina Faso. It gets a decent amount of rainfall in comparison to the drier Sahara regions. Gaoua is also very rich in gold, which kind of makes sense when you look back at the colonization period. Looking into that a little more, there's a military cave known as the Gerdingue, built by the French during the First World War, which can be trekked through to this day. The Lobi people are somewhat known for their connection to the religion animism. That's basically a religious practice that draws ties to the aforementioned sacred grounds. Moreover, the city is also a hot spot for the housing style of the Lobi people known as Sukala. Concealed corners, low ceilings, and V-shaped doors serve as a defensive mechanism, and many will have rooms specifically for livestock. Since animism follows this idea that everything has a connection via soul and consciousness, the homes tend to have a room dedicated strictly to the spiritual leader. And last but not least, we will be looking at Burkina Faso's largest city, the capital, Ouagadougou. Naturally, this will be the most extensive segment, located in the Kadiago province, with a population of about 2.4 million people. Oftentimes, you'll just hear it shortened to Ouaga. It can be dated all the way back to the 11th century. Back then, it was originally called Kumbi Tanga. By the 15th century, it became the capital of the aforementioned Mossi Empire, which remained the throne of the Moronaba, or the Mossi emperors. Actually, to this day, Ouagadougou hosts the Moronaba ceremony every Friday right at the Moronaba Palace. French colonizers would rename the whole region Upper Volta as per the Volta River. This remained the capital through that and still does after independence. Naturally, this has the biggest economy and the most cultural aspects to it, both of which we will dive into a little further. It's linked via rail to the neighboring Niger, Ivory Coast, and Ghana, and it's home to the Thomas Sankara International Airport, which has connecting flights to other West African regions and Europe. Sankara. Could probably do a whole video on him alone, but we're going to try to keep this brief. Thomas Sankara was the president of Burkina Faso, giving it its name from 1983 to 1987. He had a huge hand in the development of the country, being a very charismatic leader, often called Africa's Che Guevara. With a background in Pan-Africanism and Marxist theory, he increased literacy in the country from 13% to 73%. He also vaccinated millions of children within a span of only weeks. He also built a lot of infrastructure without foreign aid for the sake of national unity, increased food production, and significantly strengthened rights for women. In 1987, he would be assassinated due to the severing of interests in France. But as the man who gave the country its name, he obviously holds a high importance not only in Ouagadougou, but in the entire country. There is a statue of him right at the assassination site, and obviously a lot of other important buildings and schools have named themselves after him. All of this gives way to making Ouagadougou the industrial center that it's known for, up there with Bobo-Dioulasso. A lot of workers will move to this region to seek employment in the factories and the industrial plants. This then allows them to send goods back to their rural areas. Family-owned businesses aren't uncommon either, and handicrafts around commodity production such as textiles, matches, and carbonated beverages are very common. Oh, and you can definitely get your tourist cash from bars, restaurants, and hotels. Now, looking at the cultural angle of the city, there are a plethora of things worth discussing. For one, you can see the Ouagadougou Grand Mosque and the Ouagadougou Cathedral. Cathedrals and mosques are almost always cool looking no matter what. It also has a National Museum of Music and a La Maison des Peuples, which is a massive theater that seats 2,500 people for concerts, events that represent modern architecture. One of the neatest sites in the city is the Monument of National Heroes, which is pretty self-explanatory. I mean, look at this thing. It sits in the center of a giant rounded field with roads connecting to it, which looks incredible at night. Of course, there are also plenty of government buildings, namely the Town Hall of Ouagadougou, and this allows the communes to invest in the city's growth. In terms of education, the University of Ouagadougou holds about 80% of the country's university students. And the city is all about parks. The Ouahigouya was at one point a sacred forest before colonization, where people would go for traditional initiations until the French made it a park in the 1930s. Now, you can visit it for its lakes, its greenery, and you are welcome to explore its scenic pathways. Oh, I'm gonna butcher this one. There's also the La Unité Pédagogique, which animal lovers will enjoy due to the fact that it shelters them with some free roaming and stretches 20 acres as a biosphere system. Speaking of biology, Ouagadougou is also known for having a lot of large trees, and that was another thing that Sankara wanted to expand upon. They give a rather vibrant look into the growing modernist architecture that seems to be expanding within the city limit. And unsurprisingly, it's the only city in the country that has a US embassy. And with that, we conclude not only our first 7 cities bit, but the first of a focus category period. I hope you like this, as it allowed me to be a little less general in what I looked at. As always, check out my other videos, and if you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, please feel free to do so. Any and all feedback, positive and negative, is always welcome. Thank you for taking the time to peer into the urban life of the Burkinabe people, and I will see you next time.